Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update. It's a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives: debts, jobs, incomes, our own and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I hope that enables me to provide some useful updates on what is happening to the economy around the world. Before jumping into the program today, I want to remind and invite those of you that either live and work in the greater New York area or who might be visiting that the next monthly economic update, the one that I do in person at the Judson Memorial Church in Lower Manhattan, will take place on Wednesday, May 9th at 7:30. That's the Judson Memorial Church right on Washington Square. You can't miss it. Wednesday, May 9th at 7:30. Please, if you'd like to meet me and give me a chance to meet you, here's a way to do a live session of Economic Update. And I look forward to those of you that might be in New York on May 9th to join me there and then. I want to begin today's updates by a discussion of something that has existed for a long time in Germany, but I recently had occasion to discover how few people, in the United States at least, have any idea about what the Germans have now taken for granted. The word in German is called Mitbestimmung. That's a mouthful, and let me tell you what it means. The loose translation in English is co-determination, helping to make the decisions. Where does this Mitbestimmung, where does it occur? It occurs in enterprises, that's right, inside corporations in Germany by law. The law that set this up, the most famous law that set this up, was passed in 1976 in Germany. And the law specifically entitles workers to elect their own representatives to sit on the board of directors of German companies. Here's how it works. For all companies that have 2,000 or more workers, the workers and the workers alone elect just under 50% of the members of the board of directors. Remember, the board of directors is the one that makes the basic decisions in a corporation: what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. This gives workers a direct, representative place at the table for corporate decisions. For companies with 500 to 2,000 workers, 1/3 of the board of directors is elected by the workers. Let me give you an idea of the logic behind this. The assumption in Germany and in the law is that the owners, the shareholders of a corporation, and the board of directors they select the majority of, will be looking out in running the corporation for what's good for them. That is, the shareholders and their representatives will do what's good for the shareholders. Therefore, if you want a corporation, the Germans reason, to also be responsive to the needs of the workers, then they must have a seat at the deciding table also. They have to have workers' representatives in the room at the table when the basic decisions about what a corporation does are deliberated, debated, and decided. And that's the law. Corporations must do that, and they have been doing it now for almost half a century. By the way, German capitalism has a better record over the last 20 years than American capitalism, has a much lower unemployment rate, has a much greater growth of wages, and so on. That's not even all that the Germans do. They have a second law, which gives all workers in every workplace the right to form what's called a workers' council, elected entirely by workers. It exists virtually in every workplace in Germany, and it's to be the representative of the workers in the decision-making of the corporation. Now, please note with me, Germany also has trade unions. The trade unions are a voluntary association that workers can or cannot choose to join, to build, and so on. And the unions struggle with the employers over big questions like wages and basic conditions of work. But the day-to-day organized work of how you run a corporation, how people treat each other, how much information workers have about what the corporation is or isn't doing, that's taken care of by the representatives on the board of directors and by the works councils. It is a stunning example that one can have a modern capitalism, perhaps one of the most efficient of modern capitalisms, and the efficiency has not been compromised by giving workers a role. On the contrary, it's one of the most efficient capitalisms in the world, and even the capitalists in Germany credit the relationship with the workers that they've had to accept. They fought it at first, but they've had to accept it as being an engine of progress even for German capitalism. Let me be clear. The owners of the shares, the corporate executives, they still run the show. But they have to run it with an eye on what the impact of any decision they make is on workers, because the workers are going to know about it. The workers' representatives are going to know a lot of the information behind it, and you're not going to be able to trample on workers the way you do in places like England and the United States. That may have something to do, for example, with the fact that in Germany there's a national health insurance that covers every person from birth to death. It may have something to do with the fact that the tuitions at all universities in Germany today are zero, not just for German citizens, but for any citizen anywhere who comes to and is accepted for entry to a German university. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. My next update has to do with research done by something called the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP. And if you're interested in what I'm about to go over with you, you can always go to the web and find ITEP, which does this research. And the research I'm going to report to you about has to do with corporations who have access to a lot of special conditions in the tax code that allow them to reduce the amount of taxes they have to pay. I want to stress here, these are things these corporations have done before the mammoth tax cut that was given to them last December by Trump and the Republican Party. Before that, there were already many, many gimmicks inserted into the law, usually by the lobbyists for the companies that benefited from the law being changed in this particular way. Okay, here we go. First, there was a group of 15 corporations that ITEP found interesting. Together, these are major corporations in the United States. If I had more time, I'd give you all their names, but we don't. These 15 major corporations together in the year 2017, the year just passed, together made $24.5 billion worth of profits. We're talking about big corporations. That's just their profits, okay? These 15 companies that made roughly $25 billion in profits were able to get, this is what I want you to pay attention to, $1.4 billion in rebates from the United States Treasury. Let me explain again to make sure you get it. These 15 companies made these 15 companies made $25 billion in profits. The taxes they paid on that were zero. because of gimmicks in the law, they got the government to give them $1.4 billion in rebates. So ITEP calculates, ready, that their combined tax rate, these 15 mega corporations, was minus 5.6%. Try to imagine what it would be like if you got a salary, you worked all year, the tax bill on the salary was nothing, zero, and the government sent you some money as a rebate so that your tax rate would be minus something. I'll give you one company's name because it's in the news a lot and I thought you'd enjoy it. Amazon Corporation. Amazon received a $137 million federal rebate on its $5.4 billion in U.S. profits in 2017. That's an effective tax rate for Amazon of minus 2.5%. And lest you miss the implications, Amazon made $5.4 billion in profit. It paid no tax whatsoever. That is their contribution to the costs of the United States government. Schools, hospitals, roads, national defense, you name it, was zero. But on top of it, they got a rebate of $137 million. And where did the government get the $137 to give to Amazon on top of them not being required to pay any taxes? Well, there, on behalf of Amazon, I want to thank all of you because you paid the taxes that allowed Amazon to have a negative tax rate. Your tax rate is positive, Amazon's isn't. Who's laughing on the way to which bank as we speak? I need to bring to your attention a remarkably ugly example of the mixture of capitalism and politics from one of my favorite states, Kentucky. They recently passed a law which really requires that kind of shaking of the head that you all know what that means. A law was passed that allowed only one kind of doctor with one kind of specialty to evaluate the illnesses of minors suffering from black lung disease. Previous to this law, a variety of different doctors could be the evaluators of how sick a person was, a minor, from having contracted black lung disease when you work in the mines. Why is this important? The law in Kentucky requires that victims of the epidemic of black lung disease must be compensated. They get a benefit covering their medical expenses and so on that has to be paid either by the coal companies for whom they worked or by the insurance companies that are maintained by those coal companies. But how much you get and whether you get any benefits depends on how you are evaluated by a doctor. I hope you're beginning to get the story. The doctors in question, right, that were the kinds that were allowed and uniquely allowed are connected to coal companies. Oh, goodness. So a coal company connected doctor is the only one allowed to evaluate whether a victim of black lung disease is indeed a victim of black lung disease and has the disease and therefore qualifies for the benefits. Clearly, the doctor who decides you're not qualified saves the coal company or the insurance company of the coal company lots of bucks. How to take the law, how to take politics and make it work so that the coal companies can either save on their insurance premiums or save on the money they would otherwise have to pay to the people who got sick working in the mines. What a connection of capitalism and politics. Before going on to my next update, I want to remind you, as we often do at this point in the program, that we maintain two websites, rdwolff with 2fs.com, and democracyatwork.info. That's all one word, democracyatwork.info. Those websites are available to you 24/7 at no charge ever. Through those websites, you can communicate to us and let us know what you like and don't like, would like to see on the program, which we urge you to do. Likewise, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you are interested in viewing this program as a video rather than simply audio, please check us out at patreon.com, Patreon. And I want to take this moment to thank our Patreon community, folks that regularly go to patreon.com/economic update to see the video version. They are a very loyal group, a very supportive group, and I want you to know that everyone associated with this program appreciates their interest and their ongoing support. We also maintain podcasts, Left Out and Puerto Rico Forward. Other podcasts are in the works that we hope to add soon. The Puerto Rico Forward is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play as well. Take a look at our websites, folks. Take a look at our Facebook and Twitter accounts. I think you will find them very rewarding and interesting. Let's return. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco did some research recently that I wanted to bring to your attention. The federal government keeps records not only of how many people are working or unemployment or are on unemployment, but also a more finely investigated set of statistics. And the one that I want to talk to you about are people who have part-time jobs. And they work it out even more detail than that, because they distinguish between people on part-time jobs who want a part-time job and people who are on a part-time job, in the language of the government, involuntarily. That is, they want a full-time job, but they could not find one, and they had to settle for a part-time job. I thought you might be interested to know that in 2017, the last year for which we have data, involuntary part-time employment was higher by many millions than the number of involuntary part-timers back in 2006, which was the last year before the crash of 2007 and 8. Why am I telling you this? Again, because it is my job, partly as I conceive it, to let you know that when you hear the phrase recovery applied to the American economy since the crash of 2007, 2008, you are probably wondering, if you're like most Americans, if there's a recovery, why is my situation so unrecovery-like? So I'm here to explain to you that you're right. The use of the word is what's wrong. We don't have a recovery, or to be more accurate, we have a recovery for a small share of the American population. The big majority have not had a recovery. Even if they got a job after being unemployed, the job was lower paid, fewer benefits, less security. Or in the case of the statistics gathered and reported on by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, you were more likely to be an involuntarily part-time employee than before. That's not a recovery, folks. It means you're maybe not as bad off today as you were in 2009, 10, and 11. But recovery, if it has any real meaning, means that whatever your situation was before the crash of 2007 and 8 has been reacquired by you. That hasn't happened. Those jobs, most of those good jobs that left, haven't been recovered. They're not there anymore. They're either replaced by computers and robots, or they've been moved to other parts of the world where people can be paid much less than you. The next economic update is about the problem of eviction in the United States. I haven't spent a lot of time talking about that, so I wanted to do that in two ways. First, a few years ago, a book was written, and it's as relevant today as it was 4 or 5 years ago when it was published. The author is Matthew Desmond, Desmond, and the book was called Evicted. Easy title to remember. It got a lot of attention. People like Bill Gates and former President Obama named it among the best books they had read, and it was awarded a Pulitzer Prize. Mr. Desmond's team of researchers has been doing work, and I want to report to you on the work in the book, but also since the book. He's even developed an eviction lab that studies evictions. So here's some of the things he found that I think shed light on the American economy and once again on the very questionable nature of that so-called recovery we're supposed to believe in. Here are the most stunning statistics. In the many, many communities that they studied, they found that on average, 1 in 50 renter households had been evicted. The figure was 1 in 25 households had been evicted in Milwaukee, and 1 in 9 in Richmond, Virginia. If you looked even further in Richmond, as they did, you discovered that 1 in 5 renter households were threatened with eviction in 2016, even though not all of them got to that point. I want to talk to you about what this entails. Number one, an eviction is a losing proposition for both the landlord and the tenant. For the landlord, it usually means that the landlord has been unable to collect the rent for some period of time. Given the expenses the landlord has in maintaining the property, this is a loss for the landlord of income. For the family, the tenant, the renter, it's of course much more tragic because that family has to go through the trauma of being literally thrown out of their home. And typically that's the husband and the wife and the children and perhaps some elderly relatives that are being taken care of. The shame, the costs, the dislocation, the interrupted schooling, you can imagine, for those of you that haven't even gone through it, what an eviction is as an experience shaking up the lives of every person there. In many cases, evictions occur because the people being processed by the landlord don't understand the law, don't have access to a lawyer, don't even show up in court, which automatically means a judgment against them. Here's something that struck me. For the evictions that they studied across the United States, the median amount of rent owed by the family was $686. Now, folks, no matter how you count, to subject a family of fellow American citizens to the trauma of an eviction, the adults, the children, in order to resolve a matter of 686, if that's the median, it means half of the people evicted owed less than $686. What kind of a society puts people through that kind of a trauma for that amount of money? It's a real question whether you should put any family through such a trauma, period. But for that? You know what this means? I haven't done the arithmetic, but I could. That if a single person like Jeff Bezos took his $100 billion of assets and made $10 billion of that available, leaving him with $90 billion, which would still leave him the richest person in this country, that $10 billion would resolve and remove the need to evict anyone in the United States for a couple of years. What morality, what commitment to family values allows what I just said to be true? And it is true. What's the problem here? I don't think the problem is the tenant, and I don't think the problem is the landlord either. The problem is we don't have an economy that can provide to America's families the jobs, the supports, and the income that would allow them to have a decent home, occupy it like everybody else. We are subjecting a sizable number of people to a fundamentally irrational waste of resources and of their lives for amounts of money that shouldn't in a million years be allowed to cause such damage. My last update, and we're pressed for time, has to do with Mr. Trump's tariffs on China. He proposes the following. The Chinese, he says, are terrible. They put a 25% tariff on U.S. cars, making U.S. cars more expensive for Chinese citizens, who therefore don't buy very many of them. In all of his tirades, he neglects to mention that the United States has had, since 1963, a 25% tariff on trucks made outside the United States and brought here. That's right. The United States does, and has been for 50 years, exactly what Mr. Trump finds so objectionable in what the Chinese do, who haven't had their tariff on anywhere near as long. That's only one of the many contradictions in all of this tariff conversation. Here's the truth, folks. It's all about looking a certain way to the media and to Mr. Trump's political base. It makes no economic sense. It isn't justified. It's kind of nonsense. Pure theater for the votes. And maybe a few extra profits for some of the car companies. Although they certainly couldn't get those profits if they got access to China for their cars and China got access to the United States for their trucks. We've come to the end of the first half of Economic Update. I hope you found these economic updates interesting. Please stay with us. After a very short break, we will be right back.